Thank you so much for having me on this beautiful day. It is a beautiful day out, and I know that many of you have spent yesterday and will spend today on subjects of immense importance, but I hope you have a chance to enjoy the University of Connecticut, and I want to thank UConn for its very intense and profoundly significant interest in this topic, which is vital to our national security. In fact, my most recent involvement just last month was at a hearing, actually a couple of hearings involving our top cyber security leaders from the military, including Admiral Michael Rogers, who is head of the Cyber Command and director of the NSA, on the topic of how we can better bolster our national defenses against cyber attacks, how we can define what is an act of war against this country by a foreign state or a state-sponsored actor, and how we can invest in the private sector and strengthen the relationship between the private and public sectors, because truly a partnership in this area is vital. And we've known that for some time, but we have failed to act as aggressively and strongly as we must to protect this nation. Protect it against foreign actors, but also against terrorists who may simply seek to disrupt our vital infrastructure and systems in this country, and against common criminals who are seeking to steal identities. The latest in the massive theft of data involving Yahoo, some 500 million accounts, involving encrypted passwords, telephone numbers, addresses, all kinds of email-related information, was absolutely horrifying. And I think it will provide impetus for a measure that I have sponsored with Senator Nelson called the Data Security and Breach Notification Act. This measure very simply would establish requirements that the FTC would administer for national protocols and practices, standards to be applied in private businesses, flexible, sector-specific standards that would be promulgated with the input and involvement of those businesses who would be directly affected. And it would require also, second, a national breach notification standard, so that, as seemed to be the case in Yahoo, delays would not potentially harm consumers. The breach at Yahoo, as you well know, occurred some 2 years ago. When Yahoo actually discovered it, it remains an issue under investigation, as are many other issues involving this massive breach. But a national breach notification standard would help to make sure that consumers are alerted when their sensitive personal information is in the public realm and potentially vulnerable to abuse through identity theft. Sometimes I'm asked, well, you know, why are you so concerned about identity theft? You know, it's just another kind of crime, but it is among the most devastating, painful, and enduring kinds of crime, as you well know, if you've ever been a victim of it. And increasingly, Americans are victims. It's one of the most commonly reported complaints to the Federal Trade Commission. It may be the most commonly now. Identity theft is a pernicious and insidious crime that can and must be prevented by stronger protections, more proactive practices by industry that the government should help foster and enable. The requirement for national standards relating to security protections, whether they're two-factor authentication or other kinds of practices, as well as breach notification standards, are simply a matter of leveling the playing field so that the good guys are rewarded by that level playing field and consumers are protected. And I think that the good guys obviously are in this room, and I hope will be supportive of this measure because I think it can truly help save countless funds and futures for consumers. What we see in our work on the Armed Services Committee is that the cybersecurity area is, in fact, a battlefield. It is a battlefield that involves asymmetric actors. As you well know, the hackers don't need huge investments in submarines or helicopters or joint strike fighters. They need a computer. And that gives them the ability to penetrate and potentially undermine our critical infrastructure, whether it's utilities or our financial system or our healthcare system. Critical infrastructure is at risk every day, as is our very system of defense against the kind of cyber attack that we've seen repeatedly from foreign actors as well as others. The stakes online frequently rival the ones in kinetic combat, the combat on the battlefield, the combat that involves the kind of terrorism, and we are at war against ISIS and terrorist extremism on the battlefield, but we are equally responsible for fending off attacks in cyber. And that kind of attack may come through our military networks as well as through private networks. So we need to bolster our defenses there. And one difference between the combat battlefield and the cyber battlefield is who stands at the front lines. In the cyber battlefield, there are not only the formal defense establishment of the United States, those cyber combatants that are in our Department of Defense, but tens of thousands of private and public sector technology professionals like the men and women in this room who stand on the front lines in many instances to defeat the attackers, the hackers, and others who would do harm to our infrastructure as well as to our national defense. So the corporate boardroom is as important as the Pentagon in this fight against cyber attacks. That by no means should signify that the government's on the sidelines. The government has a vital role to play in partnership with people like yourselves who are involved in our national defense against cyber attacks, whether private or foreign state-sponsored. The government can provide resources and leadership, and it should do so. That's one of the purposes of the bill that I've supported, but also of other measures like the CyberSecurity Act that has been proposed and the lead that we've urged that our Department of Defense take in fostering our national security. The government itself can lead by example in adopting best practices and protocols. The government can lead by example in encouraging the best and brightest to come into this kind of work. And the government can lead by example by reaching out. And the President is endeavoring to do so through the National Action Plan that he has proposed and the policy directive that will lead in turn to a commission and more cooperative efforts. But time is not on our side. And so my hope is that this kind of conference will help bring us together and foster the kinds of relationships that we need to have in this area. Relationships between industry and government, but also among industry itself. I questioned Admiral Rogers at that September 13th hearing about what kinds of infrastructure are critical to our nation, and said to him that nothing is more fundamental than protecting our healthcare, financial, utility systems, but also our system of electing and choosing leaders, our voting system. Now, they are better protected partly because they are more decentralized, and they are different in every state as to how votes are collected, compiled, assimilated, added. But the issue of vulnerability remains. And he agreed that this area is one that has to be examined as potentially one of critical infrastructure. Our chairman of the committee, John McCain, raised the same or similar question. So these issues are developing. A speech today can be out of date tomorrow, literally. Our values, our very democracy, as well as our security, are vitally at stake and under threat. And my hope is that we will work together to protect these systems, to adopt the latest technology in defense of personal information, our national security, and that we can work together in that effort. I want to thank you and UConn again for giving me this opportunity, and thank you all for devoting the time and attention that you do every day in your professional lives to make our technology, our systems of information safer and better. Thank you so much.